Okay, here we go. September 1st public recording of the Kubernetes Scalability SIG. Engage. So I think one agenda thing which we'll have to bump to next week is we had put our capture dump approach on the demo list for this week, but unfortunately David's out sick, and so we're going to bump to next week, and hopefully he'll be ready to go at that point.
So I've been trying to dig up issues to link to this to paste in the agenda. Maybe I'll just do it retroactively. I had some quick questions on two things I've noticed in pull requests. One, there was a pull request we talked about here, or an issue about increased API server memory usage. And at first we were thinking that this was tied to the garbage collector. I think the last thing that I saw was we decided to close that out because it seemed like it was dependent upon the order in which density tests were run versus load tests. I was I don't know, I kind of wanted to riff on that for a little bit because that sounded like there's some sort of increased memory utilization that happens, period. And maybe the tests are checking for too tight a bound if the order in which we're running the tests is causing us problems. Or conversely, the tests are leaving behind way too much memory utilization. And that also seems like something worth chasing down. I just wasn't, like, it seemed like the issue was closed, like we don't have to worry about it for release, but I wasn't sure if we were going to follow up on that. So that was one thing. And the second thing was just, there seems to be a lot of cluster startup failures lately. I'm seeing that happen a lot on KubeMark stuff, and I was curious if you had any experience with that, Wojtek.
So answering the first one, yes, we definitely want to look into it like after the release. It shouldn't be that like what was previously running on the cluster affects what is currently running. So yes, we will be I would like to look into it after the release. If anyone can help with that, that would be also great. Answering the second one, we had some KubeMark was broken a few times recently. So it was just failing. It wasn't starting. I'm not aware of any in a healthy situation, assuming that it's not broken, I'm not aware of significantly higher error rate on starting the cluster. So okay. if you have any links to it or links to PRs where it's or
yeah, like I said, I'll see what I can dig up. I just know that Jeff Grafton, there was some testing for changes put in to triage off failures to cluster fail to come up, as opposed to whatever the test was spitting out about it. And this was coming up across a number of issues. It just seemed like KubeMark was one of the, KubeMark 5, I think, was one of the ones that frequently.
Yeah, the reason why it's why in KubeMark 5 is the most frequent is because it's super fast and it's running way more frequently than the other tests. It's not that there is something special in KubeMark.
Okay, that makes sense. And then, so back to the first point on increased API server memory usage. I'm still wondering if that means to me as a cluster operator, once 1.4 comes out, if I need to plan to double the amount of memory that I allocate to my API servers going forward. Is that still the case?
So this is not a regression. So it was the situation also like that in 1.3 release. So if you are running 1.3, it shouldn't be worse than 1.4.
I hear you, I agree with you, but I guess I'm confused given that we have tests that are failing on memory thresholds now. But I guess we're saying that it's just, that's a testing thing, not necessarily the
our tests were broken. We didn't check it, actually. We had those tests written, but it was because of some misconfiguration, it wasn't turned on.
Okay, cool. Thanks. I really appreciate that. I'll go see if I can dig up links now.
Very good. Should we chase up a couple of the things from the meeting last week? Tim, do you guys have any additional scale results to report?
We do. We actually have a lot of data. We finished off 1,000 nodes, well, unsuccessfully, but we were able to, and we've logged some issues against it. Like at 1,000, I think it's worthwhile to maybe like overview what we do for some of our experiments, because we don't necessarily use all of Upstream's testing facilities. We use parts of it, but we also have our own test jig. So there's a repo that's available that we use called the SVT repo. It's OpenShift SVT. And in there, we basically have an OpenShift scalability sub-project. And underneath there's a declarative way that we use for loading our cluster, where we specify very simple, like we want 10,000 services, 6,000 projects, these X thousand other different resource objects, right? And as long as we defined like the boundaries and the templates for those, it goes ahead and it creates those things for us in a stepwise increased way, right? So a lot of times we'll exercise, using some of the templates, we'll exercise things pretty harshly, much worse than density is. So we might see things that are kind of weird. One of the things we saw was the scheduler was going to eat up a ton of CPU. And we logged that issue, and Wojtek took a look at it too.
So yeah, I wrote on this issue that like it was like service affinities predicate or priority. I'm not sure. Like I look into it, and the problem is that, or actually maybe not a problem. Yeah, might be a problem. So basically, the problem is that we don't have registered it by default, I think, in Google. That's why we probably missed it during optimizations that we did. But sure, I will look into it, but not for 1.4, unfortunately.
Oh yeah, I don't think anything we're logging now would make 1.4.
Tim, is that testing that you do against the community baseline before you do a bunch of your OpenShift work, or is this after?
It's after OpenShift work, but it's generally applicable so other people could use or rejig some of the things if they wanted to use it against the community work. So a lot of it's been written with the multi-tenant environment in mind. So instead of us like directly opening, our tests are really smart, right? Or they're smarter. I would say really smart. They're smarter in the fact that they only open a single client connection, then they do a bunch of work, and then they close the client connection. In our tests, we basically fork dozens and dozens of processes using separate individual commands, trying to test things as a multi-tenant environment would, right? But it's generally useful if you want to stress how you use your environment if you have an understanding of your load. So one of the things we saw was the scheduler issues. We also saw a number of IP tables problems. When we're adding services, IP tables just kind of goes out to lunch on the nodes a number of occasions. Surprised by some of the storage filtering results. So we have like this filter function in storage that eats up a surprising amount of CPU.
Yeah, this is something I also saw. So I sent some PR at some point, but there wasn't like very simple, like 4-line PR. Because like a bunch of time spent there is basically on validation of data that we are reading from etcd. And in my opinion, it doesn't make much sense to validate data that we already validated when writing them, but yeah.
Yep, I had that conversation with Daniel a while ago where like at some point we even do the decode. Like I didn't even know why we even decode sometimes because we decode and validate, and that alone is a lot of extra work seeing how we did all the effort to encode it to write it. So it's like we're the writer, but we're checking what we read, even though it's going to be sloughed across the wire and decoded yet again.
So in most cases, I think those decodings are done to actually do the filtering, so to get the labels from the objects. And we don't use anything else, except from validation, yeah, sure. Yeah. So we need to do something probably, but we don't need to decode the whole object.
Yep, I totally agree. As I mentioned, the heap versus RSS, we need to look into that to figure out if there's a way to trigger or force GC. Because sometimes the in-memory usage is super high by comparison to the heap usage. So like we have, as part of our testing, we run SVT on a run, then we use pprof, or we use pbench to periodically pull pprof data. And in the heap pprof data, we basically have a time series data of the RSS as well as a snap of the heap. And the heap is like 4 gigabytes and the RSS is like 20. So that's pretty much the summary of the latest findings that we have.
That's good stuff. Trying to see what else here. We were just a couple of other quick updates. I think so far our 111.2 based work seems to be the right path, although we haven't put enough work into that just yet to really be confident on that. I'm just following up on notes from last week. We are starting to do more work on the config dump. In fact, we were going to get some time with Joe sometime soon to kind of walk through some of our planning on that. I'm not really sure this is the right SIG for us to be kind of hosting this discussion, but I mean, it's something that's important to us and has been kind of, important in this meeting. So I think maybe we'll comment on it here until it seems obvious we should move it elsewhere.
So, I mean, I know there's been continual talk around making configuration of kubelet be more dynamic, driven by things like config map. What is that happening under the API mechanics SIG, or does anybody know?
SIG node.
Is it SIG node? But I mean, there's other stuff that we're going to want to configure also, like through config maps also.
Yeah, but that particular one about the kubelet is all through SIG node.
Okay. All right, so it's probably worth at least pulling together interested parties there once we have maybe a straw man of how we want to dump this stuff. It's kind of like, everything we do cuts across everything. And so I hate sending these hey, we're doing this crap to Kubernetes dev, but I think this is another one of those.
Right.
But this all does relate for, planning for things to track for 1.5. That cycle is getting started, I think, not next Monday, but the Monday after. There's going to be a meeting to start pulling together 1.5 stuff. So we should probably have something intelligent to say about that at some point.
In general, we have, a data model / throughput problem we've never really addressed. We've handled a lot of the quote unquote biggering, like getting out of our own way of getting the cluster larger, but we haven't really addressed speed issues and concerns, and also addressed some, like as Wojtek and I were talking about earlier, address some of the data model problems of the system, which I think is like the next step of scale. If you want to, first you get it big, then you get it fast, right?
I mean, there's going to be places where we're going to want to be able to shard things. And there's, and so we really need to look for places where we're doing any sort of global, context across the cluster. And I'm thinking there's places in the scheduler where it has to essentially keep the entire cluster state in memory, not just which pods are assigned, but like going up to like replication controllers and crap like that. And that seems kind of ugly and limiting. Is that kind of what you're talking about, Tim?
That's one piece of many. Yeah, definitely. What's kind of funny is if you look at the in-memory representation of some of these things, it blows out whatever's stored in etcd. It's almost like I'd almost like co-locate an etcd server. It'd be more efficient.
It may be worthwhile. Well, so number one, we could also look at things like, and I know that, talking to Brandon, the etcd guys are looking at this, things like, caches for etcd and being able to scale etcd reads up like that, like essentially out of process watch cache type stuff, similar to the way that Svelte works inside of Google, for sort of read-only access. And then it may be worthwhile to spend some time going back to those scaling goals that I just typed up, and doing a gut check in terms of, are those still appropriate, and where are we with respect to those, and do we actually have the insight and the measurement to be able to figure this stuff out?
That sounds like maybe our main agenda for next week would be to walk through that and have some of this discussion.
Link, Andy, are you asking about a link to those scaling goals?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he was working on it. I don't know that it's published yet. But
I just submitted a PR and I copied the SIG on it, so you guys can look at that for the community repo. So
excellent.
I did my manual Google Docs to Markdown translation. I started looking at tools, and it's one of those things where you can spend more time picking and futzing with the tools than to just go ahead and do it. So I just went and did it. It's a story of every diagram I've ever created. All right. Well, it's like no other pressing topics right now. Oh, link to the PR. Let me pull that up. Yeah.
Sounds like not.
Does anyone have a feel on the 1.4 release now?
I kind of don't. I they cut an alpha last week, but I still haven't seen much stuff since then. Phil's been bugging people on Kubernetes Dev and Slack to go chase down flakes, but you probably have a better idea than I do of how many he's actually successfully squashed.
So my understanding is that there should be beta cut release like later this week, which means like today or tomorrow, I think. But we'll see if that happens. So it's definitely much better than it was even a week before, like in terms of all those flakes and stuff like that. And I think that from the feature perspective, we are done-ish. I'm not sure, I think the only area where we may not be done from feature perspective is federation, and I'm not exactly sure where we are there.
It's almost as if you remembered mid-sentence that you're in a publicly recorded meeting or something, ish. But no, that's good to hear. That's sort of what I was seeing. It'd be cool if the beta was out today, because a bunch of people are going to start peeling out for vacation on the US anyway. So I think we may all come back and try and remember, wait, what beta on Tuesday or Wednesday? So it'd be great to get some time with that before then.
All right. Should we call it a wrap for today? All right. We are wrapped. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
Thanks.